Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Footy Classified. Mark Neild's future at Flashpoint tonight. Plenty on that tonight on the program. The Kangaroos are mentally weak. We'll tell you why. And the Pies and the Tigers' woes in a dramatic weekend of football. Football's First Lady, Caroline Wilson. Good evening.
Craig.
Plenty of fallout from the weekend.
Yes, a season-defining weekend for many clubs. I think you're spot on about Mark Neild. We'll be talking later in the show about the AFL's involvement in just how that might play out over the next week or two.
Lots to get to. Matthew Lloyd joins us. Let's start with North Melbourne. They are the big story out of the weekend. Once again, Lloydie, they got themselves into a seemingly unbeatable position only to see it stripped away in the last 15 minutes. So is it the coaching staff's fault or should the players take responsibility?
I think, Gary, that the way they play, it's just a full-on 100% maximum tempo type of football, and they give the opposition every chance to get back in the game, because I think defensively they've allowed the 13th most points in the competition, Gary. So you see here the fade-outs for the Kangaroos this year. Round 2 up by 41 points, go on to lose. Hawthorn, Westcoast. The worst of all was the Adelaide Crows one, Gary. There was no tempo football in the last quarter. They didn't slow the game down, and they give every team the opportunity to get back and win. Yeah,
we heard Brenton Sanderson say at three-quarter time that they believed they were a chance because of the history. Let's just have a look at the last few minutes and some of these goals, and I'm sure this has been dissected a lot. I think the thing that strikes me most is that there was no support for the North defence. It was very much a one-on-one contest, and well done to Adelaide for being able to manufacture that. But each time the ball goes down, and we'll see it a little bit later, it does not appear to be anyone sitting in the hole.
No, all one-on-one, and you would not see that at Geelong or even the Fremantle Dockers, some of those teams. Watch this next effort, Michael Ferrito in the goal square. There's a long ball goes in from Tommy Lynch, but watch the effort here from Ferrito. He's nowhere near Sam Kerridge. He's just standing at the top of the goal square. There should be a man coming up to help. And then this is the last 39 seconds, Gary. How they couldn't get a loose man, why this wasn't wider to the boundary, why a play didn't come over the top and spoil it towards the boundary line. They're just standing there stagnant. It's just happened too many times now.
It goes straight back, and I think Drew Petrie gets the opportunity again. No, that's the final goal, actually. That was the one that...
All one-on-one again there, Gary.
And we had a good look at it, as everyone has, and I'm sure North would have had a look at it plenty of times today. The meeting, we believe, went for over 2 hours.
Whose fault is this?
Well, when you have those results that we've seen, it's not the first time it's happened. So you would imagine that it has been addressed over the time. So I can't for one second think that the North Melbourne coaching staff haven't put things in place. Therefore, it reverts back to the senior player or any player, to be honest, on the ground.
You let them off the hook like you did last week, and you say that they're improving, they're a good team and they're honourable losses. That just doesn't stack up, guys.
No, that's fair enough. And I take your point, but I guess when you can get 41 points up against Geelong and you can get into winning positions against Hawthorn, who we think are going to contend strongly, and they play good enough footy against the West Coast Eagles. So, yes, on the one hand...
It counts for nothing. We're in the winning business.
We are, no question about that. And I can't argue with it.
Fourth time, 3 times you could probably say
there
were reasons and they were all great clubs and West Coast were at home, etc., etc. The fourth time, interestingly, Petrenko said at the end of the game that he talked about fitness in the last quarter. He said that we backed ourselves in terms of fitness and run against them, but the coach implied it's nothing to do with fitness.
Psychologically, Gary, every team in the competition would be thinking, if we're in the hunt at three-quarter time, we can now beat the Kangaroos. If you look at their record...
Are they chokers, Matthew?
Oh, you'd have to say they are. And I think their coach on the weekend just slammed them like he should have. That he's going to... I'll be interested in selection, because he said, I will drop the mentally weak. And if you look at their record over the last 3 years under Brad Scott, they just cannot beat the top 4 teams. They've really struggled. They've been beaten 27 games. They've won. Only 4 have come against the top 8. So they beat the bottom 8 sides, defeated the top 4 side only on 2 occasions. So that just proves to me that they can't match it when the going gets tough with their best sides.
And among their come-from-behind losses included the Port Adelaide game last year, when Port Adelaide couldn't beat anyone but came from 6 goals back. So there's definitely something... they're doing the same thing wrong over and over again.
He's flogging them on the training track. I mean, it's a long time since I've heard a coach say that he's going to do that. Is that...
Oh, yeah, I'm all for it.
Yeah. I thought it was quite refreshing, I've got to say.
The reality is they get there at training, though, and the phys editors get involved, and there's another game to be played in 6 days' time. But good old belting never hurt anyone.
We spoke to Drew Petrie about the coach's claim they were mentally weak. Today, this is what he had to say.
I suppose we deserve the criticism for what happened yesterday. Being in the position we were, we did a lot right, but we did a bit wrong too, so we saw that. And the coach's comments on being mentally weak, how does that sit with you as a senior player? Well, I guess evidence is there from yesterday that he's probably right at the moment.
Hard to argue with the evidence. Hutchie, you reckon I've let him off the hook. I'm going to give you the opportunity now from a Brad Scott point of view. Do you think he shoulders some of the blame when the game gets tight in the last quarter? And if so, on what basis do you make the judgment?
My opinion is insignificant compared to his or yours, but here's my 2 cents worth. Oh, I'm about to give it to you. Here's my 2 cents worth. I think that he is stubborn, and that is a wonderful trait when you're winning. And his twin brothers are the same. They're very stubborn. And there's an argument to say that he drops his bundle when they're...
No, that's your argument.
Well, watching his actions in the box...
What is this? What are you reading?
His frustration bubbles over. There's a bit of poor us, poor me about it.
You think that you're reading that from that? You think he's playing a martyr?
Gary, there is a continual trend of him backing his team and not wanting to put players behind the ball, is there not?
I just said that. I'm not deaf.
So is he stubborn? Do you agree that he's stubborn?
He could be, but what you're saying is...
That might make him the best coach of all time in the long run.
You just said he drops his bundle.
It appears from the outside
that
he drops his bundle.
It's an extraordinary claim. The coach sits there and when it gets a little bit tight and a bit hot, he just drops his bundle.
He's a young coach, Gary. And the great qualities about him, the stubborn, determination, the leadership, all those things are fantastic. But I just wonder whether he doesn't want to change what he does at the business end.
OK, let's have a look at Brenton Sanderson, and he was excited, as you would be. I mean, it was an amazing situation. This was the winning at the siren sound, or no, the winning goal in actual fact. Petrenko just kicked the goal to put him a point in front. No bundle dropping in there, Archie.
Well, it was fantastic scenes. How quick did Darren Milburn motion to get players behind the ball the second they kicked the goal? I know Brenton was up out of his seat. I know we're going to have another look at it. It might be a bit difficult. But Milburn was calling to get players behind the ball 1 second after they hit the front.
No,
maybe my views are old-fashioned.
It's not Milburn. It's a different coach up the back there on the... you see at the far right
Adelaide
corner.
Need enormous credit. They've restructured a forward line, been able to find a way to kick 125 points. And we talk about Drew Petrie not being able to find the loose, which is exactly right. But when you have a look at that behind... I haven't finished. When you're behind the goals, you see Adelaide players working fanatically to be one-on-one and to deny them the outlet.
And they smashed the Kangaroos in the centre bounce in that last quarter, which also helped. But just on the Crows... I think for both teams, whoever lost was going to miss the final. So I think that's why it was such a significant win. And as a result, I think North are now in serious trouble.
So they need to win, 11 out of the next 13, by your reckoning?
To match last year's efforts, yeah.
Jack Ziebell, on top of the loss, tonight finds himself with a 3-week suspension as a result of this late hit on Jared Lyons. It was deemed to be reckless, low impact and high contact, and it drew 5 activation points, and he had the carryover as well. So... your thoughts on that initially? Before I get your thoughts, actually, this incident from the pre-season with Taylor Duryea of the Hawthorn Footy Club is worth having a look at. And we can also hear what Mark Fraser, the chairman of the match review panel, has to say by way of explaining him getting off.
You see him go to try and smother the footy, so there's a mild high contact made, but there's the actual attempt to smother the football, and he couldn't tackle him because he's kicking the football and he's trying to smother it, and the high contact's made. But he was going for the football, and no realistic alternative.
You could argue that you could put the same explanation to the Ziebell case, could you not?
You could, but I thought Ziebell had a bit more time, Gary, and that I think Duryea on both cases is probably worth a week. If Ziebell's is worth 3, Durea's worth probably 1, because I thought the force of Ziebell's was a lot firmer.
Yeah, so a little bit of lag time between the kick and then when he made the decision to get off the ground, I guess.
So I think it's right. I've taken a long time to come around because I love the physical side of the game, Caro, but I think in that case it's probably right that he goes.
Tex Walker tweeted. He did. He said 3 weeks. Lucky I'm unable to walk around because I would have hit the deck. This needs to change, or our game is getting soft. Hashtag soft.
He's reflecting the views of a lot of players, but you can't bump in the head.
Exactly.
Bottom line.
The Tigers, Gary, were disappointing on the weekend. It was the big stage for them, 84,000 in Caro, and they didn't measure up again against the best sides.
No, they didn't, and an age-old problem raised its head again, and that was their disposal, and particularly their efficiency out of the back half. Essendon put enormous pressure on them. They had a tendency, Matty, to try and find the short pass. I think they watched last week in Brisbane's effective way of going forward, not bombing to those big, tall marking Essendon forwards, but they weren't able to execute.
This is like a horror movie for a Richmond supporter. Some of this disposal, this is taking you back 3 years ago to Richmond, and we thought they'd gone past that, but what Essendon decided, they said that if Richmond can't rebound the ball through Basher Hawley and those type of players, and you slow them down, they'll just continually turn the footy over. And if you can shut down Brett Delidio, Caro, that I don't think there's too
Which
many other
Hocking
players
did.
who can hurt the
Hocking
game.
did a pretty-
Cochin kicked his first goal for the season and we're at round 9. So he's not hitting the scoreboard. So I don't think there's enough players that can...
All of the midfield was smashed by Essendon's midfield. Look, statistically, you can tell me all you like.
This
and
is
so many
Delidio,
players
Hocking
down.
on Delidio in here.
He did a fantastic job on him, Gary. Axel Foley started on Joe Watson, which seems strange to me, given that he's only just back in the side and has not been in great form. But for a Richmond person, it was just
Roll
the
out nicknames,
tentative...
Richmond person, all right?
No,
Axel Foley.
The tentative sort of insipidness about that performance. They just seemed a bit... They didn't want to have a crack. They almost seemed a bit
That's the
left-footed.
supporter and the fan in you. You're too emotional about this.
No, they were tentative.
They're not that far away against the best.
They did not have a crack.
This is what
They
Matty
did not
was
attack
alluding
quickly.
to earlier in the piece.
It's not a Richmond supporter
Yeah, it is.
speaking.
When
You're
Cochin,
emotional.
Delidio, Martin and Revolt, their numbers when they win as opposed to when they lose and the flow-on effect.
Oh, no doubt, Gary. That if the top 4 players don't perform for Richmond, they do not win games of football, and that's an absolute fact. And so Richmond, Hutchie, I know you had them top 4 at the start of the year, but until they get past that and improve the lower end's performance, they're going nowhere.
They're not far away. They're going to make the finals. They're not.
I think they showed themselves to be
pretenders.
pretenders on Saturday night. I mean, everything, the stage was set, everything was perfect. Great money for the club, great publicity for the club. Massive stage, as you say, biggest ever Dreamtime crowd, and what a great game that is. And they failed. And you might say I'm being a supporter, but anyone
There's no
could
doubt about
see
that.
that Jack Revolt was looking to have a big night. And they just didn't get the ball down to him. They were kicking backwards, not forwards.
Just to quickly back over that, you think Delidio showed his colours earlier in the year when he reacted to the tag, and now other clubs are starting to feed off that?
I can't speak for other clubs, but I saw a reaction from Brett Delidio that you would jump all over if you were an opposition club. I just think that he's their best player, so you go after him, and if you can take down their best player, I think that's the key to beating Richmond at the moment, which isn't a great sign.
But the ball's in his court. I mean, that's all the great players are able to overcome that and make it difficult to tag. So much so that some of them are untaggable. They just let them play on their own terms.
We did in the short term against Kane Corns a few weeks ago, who was in great form at the time.
The recruiting, they've gone to bolster and add depth to their list. And some of these players have been very good. I look at them, and some of them have been just top-ups, and that's fair enough as well.
Some of them haven't really had a proper crack yet, too.
No, well, that's
What's your point with this graphic,
because they're
Gary?
top-ups. Well, my point is I think that recruiting is going to get them to a stage where they can challenge for the 8. And there's a chance that they'll make it this year. But they need to add some class. And I know that Conker didn't play and Ellis didn't play, and they are important, and Dylan Grimes in the back half. But as it stands right now, I think that list is capable to get them in and around the 8. I'm not sure they can go much further.
So you don't think they've recruited for a flag? They've recruited to be one of the best.
Well, you crawl
sides.
before you walk, before you run, Hutchie. And lots of clubs have made the bad analogy, you're right?
Yeah, I'm with you.
of trying to go too far. They were crawling for a long time. They're walking strongly now.
Yep.
But it's the run to the top 4 that they've got to get sorted.
I think that was a big setback on Saturday.
No, I picked Richmond. I fell in. I thought that they would step up.
They're going to finish 6th or 7th, somewhere in there, aren't they?
What makes you feel so confident about that?
Because their draw is so good, and they're going to beat all the teams
But
beneath
doesn't
them. They've
what
beaten
you
everyone
see-
beneath them, haven't they?
Yeah, no, but they've got to beat... Well, are they better than North Melbourne?
At the moment, they are.
I don't know if they are, so anyway.
Well,
No, I think North are ahead of Richmond.
The Bombers are. Let's just put them on the agenda. Magnificently led by Joe Watson, and they have been able to overcome what has been a really difficult, obviously, start to the year, and they just look sharp. I mean, there was a huge question mark going in about whether they're going to hit that wall that they've hit for the last couple of years, and on the back of the interview process and all those things, answered them emphatically. Well done to James Hird, well done to Joe Watson and that group. They were magnificent.
Watson's the best player in the game right now. And I think that his leadership, he's the best captain in the game as well, so I don't think there's too much he can't do. But I think their foot skills, their run, their carry, I don't think they have too many weaknesses.
Can they win it?
I think there's 3 teams that can win it. Geelong, Hawthorn and the Sydney Swans, but them and Fremantle, to me, are the next run underneath.
You haven't got the Magpies in there, Lloydie. We are going to talk about them and the Melbourne Footy Club next on Footy Classified.
You're watching Footy Classified for home, timber and hardware. Go where the tradies go. Get involved on Twitter too. At Footy Classified to join the discussion. At Footy Classified or at Craig Hutchie. Jump in and tell us your thoughts like you always do on a Monday night, Gary. It's always pretty lively after the show. Plenty of talk tonight about Collingwood too, Lordo. They look like they were set for a dynasty back in 2010 when they dominated the competition, but things are a bit perilous right now.
Well, they're hard to win premierships, and even 2 in a row. It just makes you marvel at what Brisbane did over that period. But, Gary, they were set in terms of the age bracket of what they had at that time in 2010. They've had their bad luck with injuries and things like that, but the team I saw on a Friday night play against the Swans, I could tell within the first minute or two that they did not have the energy that they played with against Geelong the week before, and players are now picking and choosing, which has gone on for most of the year. No, but Sydney missed the first 3 shots. They responded with a couple of goals, but the game pretty much played out like I thought the first 2 minutes. This is when they beat Geelong, Hutch, last week. I think what Geelong do, and Collingwood have beaten Geelong 3 times in a row under Nathan Buckley, they try and handball themselves out of trouble. So Collingwood played into their hands, they were up and about on the night, so that suited. So won't take any credit away from Collingwood, but Geelong played into their hands. Sydney play a totally different brand of footy. So this just happened.
Hunter mentality.
They did.
They went after them. They were the hunters and Geelong were the hunted. And they come up against Sydney and it got reversed.
On the weekend, and there was a total. So the first bounce, Adam Goods, one of the best players in the game. Nick Maxwell just sits back behind the footy. Side bottom, I don't think puts enough pressure on the opposition. He is on Hanbury, who just. Is probably the best player in the game right now. Watch some of these efforts as Ted Richards comes through. Watch this pressure here by that player who comes at him. Just lets him go, and watch the midfield pressure. So this is going on at Collingwood. So this is the first 20 seconds. I spoke about Geelong handballing. Sydney kicked out of defence. And suddenly, Collingwood's defenders, they don't know how to play on a man anymore. We'll talk about Nick Maxwell later. They were exposed. So that's now the way to beat Collingwood. Just kick through it, and their zoning, their pressure isn't good enough, and they were badly exposed.
Yeah, and look, Adam Goods and Harry O'Brien, I thought, played some really good footy. He's in career best form, but he ended up playing one-on-one on Adam Goods, and in the end the actual flow of the game was so much in favour of the Sydney Swans. They just had to go tight on Goods, and Harry was trying to provide run and was trying to get off, but Goods was smart enough to realise that the 50-50 ball, the contests were being won and it was being dictated to by Sydney, and got so much space that he became a nightmare. He ended up, had a wonderful game, 30 possessions and 3 goals, but there's Harry just sort of playing off him there 30 metres, and it was sort of indicative of where they were at on Friday night.
The back 6 doesn't scare anyone anymore at Collingwood, does it?
Well, I used to think that was the most impregnable part of them. They were so good. They were able to play 6 and 7 against 5 and 6 when they always had a spare, which meant that they never really were exposed one out, and Nick Maxwell was arguably the best third-up defender in the competition. Now he's having to play one-on-one, and he had Morton on the weekend, and he gave him a few issues, and there was just, marking one out like that. Nick would love to have that all over again, but when they were so good, I mean, they were forcing ball going. There was pressure in the midfield, which you've talked about, which meant the ball was forced to go long and high, and Nick Maxwell and those sorts of players were so good at just zoning off their men.
Interesting, Gary. No Beams, no Thomas, and no Heath Shaw, one of the crucial players you're talking about. They said he was injured, but I heard Luke Darcy say on the weekend that it was a skin fold issue with Heath Shaw. I haven't confirmed it either way.
I haven't heard that. But you would imagine if he was fit, I mean, that is unbelievable if it's true, but it's the first time I've heard it. But they need him to play in the back half. The rebounding from the back half in terms of the scoring trends, Sydney were unbelievable. From their rebound 50s, converting them into scores. They kicked 6 goals, 2 out of their back 50. The Magpies managed a point.
Yeah, Jordan Russell and Marty Clark, unfortunately, just didn't look up to it the other night.
And young Marley Williams is still finding his way. So it is a different... I mean, that's what we have to concede. It's a much different looking Collingwood side. Quentin Lynch was recruited specifically to help out.
Has it worked?
I tell you, in the first couple of weeks, it was like, Simon Madden was back. But his last 4 weeks, he's averaged 11 touch. He's kicked 1 goal since round 3. He was the 4th or 5th forward at the West Coast Eagles, and he's a hit-up forward. They let him go and they dropped back and double-team Cloak.
Question I have for Nathan Buckley, if I could ask him, was 9 goals between Elliott, Dwyer and one other against Geelong, and then suddenly he went with Witts. He went with Travis Cloak and he went with Quentin Lynch. So why change the winning formula?
Couldn't get any forward pressure.
No.
Interesting, something caught my eye with Buckley on the weekend. He was interviewed on Crunch Time on Saturday, and he sort of alluded to a changing of the guard. Let's have a listen.
We've got some established, experienced players that have found out pretty quickly over the last 2 years that the game moves pretty quick. Games change. It's not 2010 anymore. We've got to move in and find what our best in 2013 looks like.
I thought that was an interesting message, mentioning 2010. older players. The game's moved quickly.
Is he talking about Dane Swan there as one of those players?
I'm just interested to hear your take, actually.
Well, you mentioned Dane Swan, I would imagine, because he's spending so much time forward over the last couple of weeks, which I'm not sure it's sending a message whether they need more goal kickers or whether they're sending a message to Dane.
Well, you read into that, don't you? But is he putting enough defensive pressure on? Is the coach off him a little bit? What do you think, Lotto?
Well, I think that the cheating comment comes back to me when Nathan Buckley speaks, that he feels that what you maybe got away with a few years back or what they are doing now is nowhere near what they were doing 2 years ago. And I think Dane Swan is definitely one of those, Hutch.
No question the Swans wanted to leave their mark on the MCG Friday night. They were disappointed when they played Hawthorn in a big game earlier in the year, and they came ready to play. And Hanbury, you spoke about Dan Hanbury, who leads the Coaches Award, leads, I think, the Sunday Footy Show, the Herald Sun. He's just in rare form. Look at the work rate of this bloke through the middle of the ground. Now, watch, there's Harry O'Brien was 20 metres in front of Dane Swan. Hanbury. He goes past or gets to Harry, and you think at this stage Harry's got him covered. He refuses to concede anything, Dan Hanbury, and ends up taking a mark deep inside 50.
When you're getting beaten, that's considered cheating, isn't it? If Dane Swan did that and it was turned over, people would be on him.
Not at all, Hutchie. Not in any way, shape or form. And as I said earlier, you read the flow of the game. And he needed to be stopped on his run somewhere. He ran from the back pocket and marked it in the forward pocket.
Showing initiative isn't cheating.
But I understand what you're saying, but he does it both ways. And the one player I'd get to watch that is Dale Thomas. I know he's out for the rest of the season, but that's what Dale Thomas used to be, and that's not what he's been for the last couple of years.
Melbourne, Gary, it was sad again yesterday. Caro, the situation continues to develop with Mark Neal, doesn't it?
Well, it's impossible now to see Mark Neal clearly surviving his contract, and I would say surviving even the next few weeks, Craig. Now, there's a board meeting coming up with the Melbourne Footy Club where we think that maybe the decision could be made.
Yeah, I think there's a perception tonight, Gary and Caro, that there's a board meeting on Monday, and that
next Monday,
if they can resolve the economics of the termination, that they will move on.
Well, that's why I was talking about the AFL. I mean, we know the AFL have sent in or strongly encouraged Peter Jackson. We think Peter Jackson will probably stay now on as CEO beyond the 6 months interim appointment. Andrew Demetrio told us last week on this show that if Melbourne followed procedures and indicated that they were headed in the right direction in several areas, the Commission would look upon the club favourably in terms of draft picks, priority picks. Could the AFL even help with the payout of Mark Neal?
Be unusual, wouldn't it?
There'd be uproar throughout
from the other clubs?
Well, I would imagine, wouldn't it?
Well, it's all part of equalisation, perhaps. I mean, rich clubs make stupid mistakes as well.
Chicks get disguised in many ways, Gary, don't they?
I guess, but it would appear, I would imagine there would be uproar. I mean, from the weekend, again, the noises and the jungle drums are beating. Jared Healy on 3AW tonight was strong in his condemnation of their performance on the weekend.
They were absolutely horrible. They were non-competitive and they were, on show, the worst midfield I've ever seen. Something's got to give at that club, and if the decision hasn't already been made, the coach has just 2 games left to get some improvement against Collingwood and or Hawthorn. If not, it will be the bye for the players and bye-bye for the coach. They're bankrupt on the field. They've got to make a move before they become bankrupt off it.
And Jared, whose brother, of course, is the Melbourne Football Director, former best and fairest himself at Melbourne Footy Club, obviously closely connected with the club, went on to say that the 1.5 million loss some journos have predicted is more like 3 million this year, which is where the AFL comes in, Craig.
Gary, if the financial situation is resolved, do you think it's the right decision to terminate him on Monday?
I wouldn't be so bold as to suggest that just at the moment, Hutchie, but I could understand if that was the decision that was made.
Gary, you spoke about their effort last week, and if he continues that effort, you'll be quite content. It went backwards again on the weekend, didn't it?
Yeah, it did, against a side that I guess would show up, a side that has got failings. Melbourne's inability to win uncontested ball anywhere over the ground was again on show on the weekend. So these are really damaging numbers. Average uncontested possessions for a footy side's 209. Fremantle had 334. The Demons managed 197. There was a 137 difference, and the average competition average is 22.
The worst midfield Jared Healy said he'd ever seen, and you'd have to also say that if the coach goes, it might be costly financially, but if he stays, it could cost some players.
They could lose players, yeah.
I guess that is the decision that I suppose would drive it as much as anything down the track, that and supporters and sponsors.
Not to judge his last 2 games, if we could just jump ahead to Chris Dawes here for a minute. Not to judge his last 2 games because he's first up from a spell and he's obviously underdone. But the more and more you look at this, Gary and Lordo and Caro, the more this looks an absolutely appalling decision to bring Chris Dawes in on a 4-year contract. If you have a look at their list, Lordo, and accepting Jared Healy's point, this is the worst midfield he's ever seen. There is Nathan Jones and there is no one else. How does a club who's already paying, assumingly, $750,000 on Clark as a forward, you've got Jesse Hogan, who you took in the same period last year, kicked 5 in the VFL, going to be a star. He's going to be a $500,000 player in a couple of years. You've got Watson and Howe, who are drafted as forwards. So there's sort of potentially in 2 years 1.5 to 1.75 your list tied up in 4. And you've got a midfield need. How on earth do you go and recruit Chris Dawes?
I think they viewed...
2.2 million, about 2 million.
Well, he's on $550,000 a year. I mean, it just looks... How do you have a lopsided 5... That forward line doesn't work. Is Boyd coming through the attack cup, who would be pick 1 or 2, who they can't take. The Giants can't take him either because they've got Patton and Cameron, and he might get through to 3. It is... I just can't believe it.
If they paid $500 for him, they've paid overs because he wasn't getting a game at Collingwood the year before. But I think they saw Dawes as their centre-half forward, Mitch Clark as their full forward, and they thought that would work. But you're right about...
Hogan as the third tall.
No, but Hogan still was going to be 12 months off. He could play centre-half back, you never know, or someone else could. But just in regards to 8 inside 50s to half-time. Melbourne. So it's pretty hard to judge a forward on that.
Wasn't their need last year? I mean, Chris Dawes was shopped by Collingwood, who were just desperate to move him on. Wasn't their need midfield?
Took Tumbas and Viney.
Yeah, but they're 3 years off being influential players.
But he probably thinks Hogan is as well. So that's probably the reason why he took Chris Dawes.
I think the coach's decision to influence recruiting, and there can be no doubt, Gary, that he influenced that list management team in the recruiting
And
team.
we know that there was some toing and froing between himself and Todd Viney.
It's cost him his job. There's no other way to look at it.
Well, effort ultimately and performance on the ground.
Like the message, the ramifications of that recruiting last year and the interference in it have ultimately cost him his job.
Okay.
Now, Alistair Clarkson, speaking of coaches, last week...
Speaking of Melbourne potential coaches.
Well, last week, Alistair Clarkson said on the couch that he had not been approached by anyone else, which contradicts what you said on the weekend. Let's take a listen first of all.
Well, they didn't come at me, Jared. I mean, I never spoke to anyone from Melbourne and neither did my management. So when they say they came at me, it certainly didn't come to me.
So there's no foundation for that story, that they thought they nearly landed you?
No.
Gary?
Craig?
Is he telling the truth there?
Well, I was...
Yes or no?
That's not correct, Caro.
So he's not telling the truth?
Why would he lie?
Well, go and ask him. I've answered this 3 times over the weekend.
Yeah.
How would I know why? Why do you think he has?
Out of respect to Mark Neild?
Well, perhaps.
And others.
It's hardly disrespectful to Mark Neild, given that he's a premiership coach and you had a crack at him first.
What are you telling me for?
Did you offer him the job?
Alistair Clarkson was very, very high on, and in
Gary,
fact, the primary target.
Definitively
of the
offered him a contract to coach Melbourne.
Craig, Alistair Clarkson knew very well what was on offer for him if he chose to accept the offer of the Melbourne Footy
met with him,
Club.
spoke with him, offered him the deal.
No, that is not right. But there are enough people involved in this process. Out of respect for where they were, the Hawthorn Footy Club was still playing and were playing the final. You know, Caroline, you wrote about it. I never spoke to anyone.
I was a bit concerned about the back page.
I never spoke to
I
anyone
thought it was a good
at
story
the
at the
time.
time.
Adelaide offered him the job too, didn't they?
Well,
I
don't
there was
know.
2 job offers.
How would I know what he was doing?
So has he been clever in his words? He said no one
he's
spoke
just
to
trying to
him
be
and no
noble
one
and
spoke to his
protective and-
manager.
Caro, how can I answer for Al Clarkson? And I don't want this to be a big deal for him. He would have his own reasons why he said that.
But what he said is not true.
Maybe you work with his manager. Have you asked him?
I have not asked him.
You've never asked him?
But I think everyone
You've
accepts...
not asked him?
I didn't ask him.
You've never spoken to him about Alistair Clarkson and Melbourne Footy Club?
No.
Well, you both believe Gary,
Throw me down.
don't you? Who do you believe, Gary or Clark?
I believe Gary.
Yeah.
I also find it very weird that you've never asked Liam Pickering.
He doesn't make much sense the rest of the time.
Weird. We'll take a break on Footy Classified.
confused.
The Western Bulldogs, how good were they? We'll take a look at them next. Great scenes at Etihad Stadium on Saturday afternoon. The Western Bulldogs finally saluted, and it was on the back of some brave moves at the selection table, which saw that man Nathan Rovat make his debut. We saw Jake Stringer kick a goal earlier, Jackson McRae's ball movement through the middle of the ground, and Kobe Stevens played his best game in AFL footy, kicking 3 goals. Brendan McCartney was brave, Lloydie. Daniel Cross, a favourite son of the Western Bulldogs, was left out of the side. Daniel G. Syracusa started as a sub.
And the other one was Mitch Wallace, who lacks a bit of leg speed, who was also left out. So it was a changing of the guard. They finally won the uncontested possession, which they haven't been, and we've been banging on about that for the last 4 or 5 weeks.
Yep.
So they beat a team who's in similar trouble to them. Port Adelaide's got a bit of pace, so the jury will be out and whether they can back up again for the second week in a row.
What do they do now with Cross and Gene Syracusa to some extent? But Cross is a tough one for them now.
It is really tough because you don't want to disrespect legends of your club or great serviceable players, but really he probably doesn't really command a game anymore. So whether they give him a farewell game to thank him for his services, or they just... Because the last thing I think he wants to be doing, Gaz, is playing the last 14 or 15 games.
I'm so not a fan of farewell games.
Well, what do you do? Do you just...
Selfish.
But do you let him then play the next 15 games for Williamstown?
Presumably he went into this season knowing that might have been the case.
But what if then... Yeah, I just think that it's worth giving it to him rather than just letting him play 15 games in the VFL.
They did the right thing. Rovat was terrific in his first games. The first time under Brendan, I think the 4th time under Brendan, they've kicked 100 points or more, which is a great result. St Kilda, on the other hand...
Well, Caro, you were defensive of their list about a month ago. You said the cliff wasn't coming. You now concede they're in
St Kilda?
Yeah.
No, I said it was the wrong move of the coach to say they were rebuilding publicly before he'd fully sold the message to the players.
No, Carol, I've also heard you say that the list wasn't as bad as you thought.
Hang on.
Well, they almost made the finals last year, Matthew.
So now you're saying it is okay then?
They won more games than they lost in almost making the finals last year. They got rid of Brendan Goddard,
so
which in my view was a mistake. I think they are underperforming. I think the way they are at the moment is, they could have finished between 10th and 7th. And
with
I think
this list?
I think after the weekend we'd say that, they're clearly...
Well, I reckon last year they got everything out of their older brigade. This year they're only getting it out of Revolt. So last year they probably got the maximum out of that list, and now we're seeing the true St Kilda list.
I still think Del Santo's got more than he's been showing.
Oh, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
The Buddy situation continues to be of interest every week. He attracts headlines everywhere. There was a headline in the Herald Sun about the way he behaved at a Paran bar the week before. Jeff Harris, the Vice President, Caro, was very defensive of his star on the weekend. Not a quarter page, not a half page, a full page. I say give this paper, the Herald Sun, the red card, said the Vice President on the weekend.
Well, look, I don't like criticising other media. I cop it enough, and it's not pleasant. But it did seem strange coverage for an argument in a bar with a woman who'd put something on Facebook. It seemed an odd treatment to me. I mean, you had a crack at me for writing about his behaviour at the Grand Prix, but that was a little story in the sports section, inside page, and comments from the CEO saying that we needed to remind him of how to behave in public. It wasn't the right thing to do.
They were almost replica situations, weren't they?
Craig, complete tosh. That is the most disproportionate thing you've ever said. Page 1,
tosh.
massive.
Forget the placement of the story. That's irrelevant.
He was bumbling and incoherent at the Grand Prix in a
you
corporate
say you weren't even there.
Well, I spoke to people who were there, and I spoke to the club who officially told me they had admonished the player.
And that story of yours became news on the weekend when Tony Sheen accused you of having a source, and that source was pretty quick to deny it.
Mr. Ed Maguire, he was so fed up with having to deal with his own players that he leaked a story, which I might add was untrue, about Buddy Franklin being unsteady on his feet in front of the AFL's top dogs at the Grand Prix.
I think the source of that story there, Tony Sheen, is just an unmitigated idiot. And I will be taking legal action on that. I've never sued. I don't sue people and journalists because we're all in here and all this. But I've got to have a look at this one because every utterance that he said there is incorrect. But that is,
I get it.
Somebody way out of his depth, wanting to get his head into the media, has been a failed reporter, and has shown today why.
Did you talk to Eddie about the story, Caro?
No. I'm still getting over that photograph of Tony Sheen. I think he should sue us.
He what?
He should sue us. Oh.
I tell you, I think Tony's water pistol to a shooter.
I spoke to him on the phone.
It's like one of the... Looks like something out of a boy band.
I didn't get the story from Eddie. He didn't leak it, but a lot of senior people who were at the function did, and he was bumbling, and the club had a go at him. It was a completely different story.
Right, you compose yourself,
Bad
Karen.
photo, like a bit boy band, maybe?
Well, yeah, it was a bit boy bandish. We'll come back with Good Call, Bad Call next on Footy Classified. Thanks to Home Timber and Hardware. Time for Good Call, Bad Call. Cara, you've got the new ball. I hope you composed yourself. Leon Cameron should take over senior coaching from Kevin Sheedy right now. Good call, bad call.
Bad call, disrespectful call. Kevin Sheedy risked his reputation, moved his family up to Western Sydney, and you do that now. You show disrespect to one of the great legends of the game. It'd be bad for the club, bad for the game.
All right, Hutchie, Majak Dow needs a rest. Good call, bad call.
Good call. A tough to read call. Running out of gas, being subbed out in the games. Understandable. Probably time for another runner in the side, one less tall. Gary, good call. Lordo, Steve Motlop has elevated himself above Cyril Rioli. Good call, bad call.
Tough call, but good call, Hutch. I found it a tough one, but he's been far more consistent. I think obviously Rioli's been around a lot longer, but in his short career, Stevie Motlop finds more footy, kicks more goals, more consistent.
Lone Wolf, Jordan Lewis needs to harden up after criticising fans for giving the Bronx cheers to Buddy Franklin yesterday. Good call, bad call.
Bad call, Hutchie. He's supporting his mate. He's making sure that Buddy remains up. He's had a tough week. He got behind him, showed some solidarity. I liked it. Lordo, time for Joe Danaher to debut. Good call, bad call.
Bad call, Gary. I think it makes a player actually doing a bit of an apprenticeship in the two, so I don't think it's doing him any harm at the moment. He is dominating the VFL. He will get his chance.
He's dominating. He needs to play.
I know, but isn't it great having... Gumbleton's next in line. He can't get a game.
Oh, good. Hutchie, Skoda Stadium only attracted 6,000 spectators because they can't see the play. Good call, bad call.
Bad call. You misunderstood me here, Gary, with the question call. It's nothing to do with being in the stadium. It's to do with watching on television, Gary.
What?
This is appalling. The television view of this ground is awful. Which team's which here? You can't see. It was the same against Adelaide. Players can't see. The ground has been built...
What do you want to do? Bulldoze it?
I love the ground, but you've got to be able to see, Gary. Caro, Essendon should have accepted Ian Robson's resignation in February. Good call, bad call.
Bad call. I had to think carefully about this. Considered call, Craig. I think they needed to have a good CEO in place before they did, although the stage management has been a little bit strange to me and he won't be the last to go.
Gaz, Sam Reid's injury could be a blessing in disguise for the Swans.
Bad call, Hutchie.
Good call, bad call.
You wrote this. This is ridiculous. You reckon it'd be good for him to go out and get injured after he's only just started to find some form again?
I think it'd be good for him to have a couple of weeks off.
It's a ridiculous call from you.
Time for the segment that does make sense in segment 4. It's time for Caro's Arrow.
Before I start, let's have a listen to what Stephen Milne had to say on yesterday's Sunday Footy show.
A bit of a touchy subject. Nothing really changes with me, and what happened on Friday night was very sad for the game. And it's not just all about the racism at the moment, but I cop a few words that aren't good for anyone. And I've got a couple of kids, and they go to the footy, and family and parents, have to cop the abuse. So the sooner we can stamp it out, the better.
Mick Malthouse, a retrospective arrow to you. Your comments to Stephen Milne in 2010 perpetuated a sledging tirade against Milne that has continued to this day. You, Mick, a senior statesman of the game, a 3-time premiership coach, has never personally apologised to Stephen Milne, and when you did apologise, it was in a heavily stage-managed press release, fingerprinted by lawyers, spin doctors, club presidents and CEOs. Milne isn't totally blameless in this situation, but he does not deserve what he's been receiving on the footy field. And Mick, you didn't start this problem, but you sure as hell added fuel to the fire.
One for Mick in the Carlton colours.
3 years is a long time to be sort of had the arrow aimed, isn't it? I mean, fair enough at the time, but long time ago.
I don't think there's comment after the arrow.
He should have apologised at the time, and maybe some of this wouldn't still be continuing today.
Don't need into the closing.
Well, that was 2010's headlines. 2013's are next on Footy Classified. Thanks for staying up for the headlines. Caro, we start with the age.
And the players have launched their own anti-abuse push to start this weekend, Craig.
Pat Smith in the Australian continues to talk about James Hird's obligations as a coach.
And the West Australian ex-demon Cale Morton said he found out what running was about when he went to the West Coast Eagles.
The Adelaide Advertiser dobbing fans a story about the abuse of players in the SANFL. And in the Herald Sun, the Mark Neeld story as well. 2 weeks. Jared Healy says he's gone and the Demons don't lift and fast. The closing cook, Gary?
Jared, no, don't worry. This is not a cook at all. This is an anti-cook. This is in support of Mick Moldhouse and what he had to say after the game. Have a listen.
I thought today was a very strange... Is it a full moon? I'm not superstitious, but it's just imagination. But I tell you, that full moon has drawn that ball away from those goalposts like you can't believe. We'll blame the moon.
People laugh at that, but the full moon, Matthew, is a very powerful force and responsible for lots of things that happen in this world.
It might be.
Don't scoff at it.
I'm scoffing because over my career, for 12 years, I had to listen to Martians, marshmallows, seagulls. I thought I was listening to Kevin Sheedy.
You reckon?
I reckon he is.
Closing cook's losing its way. Used to be funny, used to have punch. Used to be a beauty.
Caro, put him down.
No, it's...
I'm lifting Mick back up.
I'm questioning it.
I'm supporter of the moon.
It's under review, the closing cook.
See you next Monday night.
Review.
Good night.